our beloved Master. When Tenjiku was asked about the incident of Tanka burning the statue, he replied, "When it is cold, we gather around the hearth by the fire." Was he wrong or not? Persisted the monk. "When it is hot, we sit in a bamboo forest in the valley," said Tenjiku. The day after the burning of the statue, Tanka Tenon went to see Nanyo, who had once been a disciple of Ino and was the emperor's Zen master. When Tanka unrolled his zazen rug, Nanyo said, "There's no need." Tanka took a few steps backward. Nanyo said, "That's right." At this, Tanka took a few steps forward. Nanyo said, "That's not right." Tanka walked around Nanyo one time and left. Nanyo commented, "The old golden days are far away, and people are now so lazy. 30 years from now, it will be difficult to get hold of this fellow."
Friends, a new series of talks begins today. The Zen Manifesto, Freedom from Oneself. It is time, a ripe time, for a Zen Manifesto. The Western intelligentsia has become acquainted with Zen, has also fallen in love with Zen, but they are still trying to approach Zen from the mind. They have not yet come to the understanding that Zen has nothing to do with mind. Its tremendous job is to get you out of the prison of mind. It is not an intellectual philosophy. It is not a philosophy at all. Neither it is a religion, because it has no fictions and no lies, no consolations. It is a lion's roar. And the greatest thing that Zen has brought into the world is freedom from oneself. All the religions have been talking about dropping your ego. But it is a very weird phenomenon that they want to drop your ego. And the ego is just a shadow of God. God is the ego of the universe, and the ego is your personality. Just as God is the very center of existence according to religions, your ego is the center of your mind, of your personality. They all have been talking about dropping the ego, but it cannot be dropped unless God is dropped. You cannot drop a shadow or a reflection unless the source of its manifestation is destroyed. So religions have been talking continuously for centuries that you should get rid of the ego, but for wrong reasons. They were asking you to drop your ego so you can surrender to God, so you can surrender to the priests, so you can surrender to any kind of nonsense, any kind of theology, superstitions, belief systems. But you cannot drop the ego if it is a reflection of God. God is a lie there in the universe, and ego is a lie within your mind. Your mind is simply reflecting a bigger lie according to its size. So religions put humanity in a great dilemma. They went on praising God and they went on condemning the ego. So people were in a very spiritual stage, in a schizophrenic space. They tried hard to drop the ego, but the harder they tried, the harder it became to drop it. Because who was going to drop it? The ego was trying to drop itself. That's an impossibility. So even in the humblest so-called religious people, the ego becomes very subtle, but it is not dropped. You can see in the eyes of your saints one of my sannyasis went to see U.G. Krishnamurti, and because he argued with him, he immediately became angry. And these people, like U.G. Krishnamurti, are talking to people to drop anger, to drop greed, to drop ego. But if you provoke them, just skin deep is their whole religion. Inside is hiding a very pious ego. And when ego becomes pious, it becomes poisonous. It is more dangerous because you become absolutely unaware of it. It goes so deep down in the unconscious. U.G. Krishnamurti has lived with J. Krishnamurti for 12 years and he never mentions his name. And if somebody brings J. Krishnamurti's name, he immediately condemns J. Krishnamurti. And whatever he is saying is just an imitation of J. Krishnamurti, paraphrasing. And the reason why he cannot accept the fact that he has been with J. Krishnamurti for 12 years is very simple. The moment he accepts that he has been with J. Krishnamurti for 12 years, then you can compare his statements with J. Krishnamurti and you will find they are simply paraphrasing. He is repeating, imitating, he knows nothing. These people have been around the world all the time. They have tried whatever the religions have been telling to them, but their effort cannot remove the shadow. If there is a shadow of the bamboos, you cannot remove the bamboo shadows unless you remove the bamboos. You cannot directly remove the shadows. They are a byproduct. If the bamboos remain there, the shadows are going to remain there. They can become very subtle. I have heard a story about a fox coming out of the cave where he used to live early in the morning. As the sun was rising behind her, her shadow was very long. She said, "My God, I am this big. I will need almost a camel for my breakfast." And she started searching for a camel for his breakfast. But the fox could not manage to find a camel. It was just middle of the day and the sun was on the head of the fox. The fox was feeling very hungry. He had another look at the shadow and the shadow has disappeared. It has not disappeared. It has come just below the fox. As long as the fox is there, the shadow is going to be there, but now it is absolutely invisible. To the fox, everybody else can see it, but the fox cannot see it. It has come just underneath. That's what happens to so-called religious people. They force their shadows, their egos, their anger, their greed, their ambitions in the unconscious. But in the unconscious, they are there and far more dangerous because you are not aware of them. You think they have disappeared. When my sannyasin started with U.G. Krishnamurti arguing, before argument he was just a great saint, so silent, so peaceful. And as the argument began, and he was afraid to be caught, he could not answer the questions. Anger suddenly arose. He may not have been aware of that anger, but my sannyasin helped him. He wanted to get rid of the sannyasin, and it is U.G. Krishnamurti who is not an authentic or sincere man. But you can fall into the trap because he is repeating beautiful phrases. His memory is good and his intellect is good. And this is the shadow. Even the original man, Jai Krishnamurti, used to become very angry just seeing my sannyasis. I had told my sannyasis everywhere, wherever Jai Krishnamurti speaks, you just sit in the front line. And at that time, sannyasis were wearing red clothes, so they were absolutely recognizable. They were having a mala with my photo in the lockage. And the moment Jai Krishnamurti will see my sannyasis all around, he will forget on what subject he was going to speak. He will start condemning me, condemning sannyas. And this man was talking his whole life about awareness. And he has forgotten the subject completely. And it was not once, because my sannyasis were everywhere, wherever he was going to speak. In London, in San Francisco, in Bombay, in New Delhi, in Madras, wherever he was going to speak, my sannyasis were there, just in the front rows. And he was so much allergic. The moment he will see the sannyasis, he will lose all control. At some times he even started beating his head that why you come here? I am against sannyas. And I had told my people, laugh joyously. Make him as angry as possible. That will bring the original man, which is hiding behind. And he could not even understand that why it is happening everywhere. And he is being distracted. He will start condemning me, condemning sannyas, and will become almost neurotic. And seeing my sannyasis laughing was almost putting more fire, and he will become more and more angry. He could not understand why these people don't feel offended. On the contrary, they are laughing. His whole time will be taken by the sannyasis. It is very easy to talk about beautiful things, intellectual grasp. Krishnamurti has been forced by the theologists of a particular brand, the Theosophical Society. It was a worldwide organization in the beginning of this century. And it was preparing Jai Krishnamurti to be a world teacher. Nobody can prepare anybody to be a world teacher. Anything that has been prepared is going to be false. And they almost tortured him in the name of discipline. And they got hold of him at the age of 9. And from that moment, he was not allowed to move into the world. He was not allowed to go into the society. He was continuously hammered with his scriptures. 3 o'clock early in the morning, he has to get up, take a cold bath, and be ready for the Theosophists, leaders of the movement, who will recite Sanskrit scriptures, Tibetan scriptures, Zen scriptures. And he was almost asleep, a 9-year-old child. And this went on up to his 25 years. They managed to create a certain personality. You can only create a personality. And they had the hope that they have succeeded in creating a world teacher. Now he was writing beautiful poems, beautiful articles, which were published by a section of Theosophical Society which has been created especially for J. Krishnamurti. The organization was called the Star of the East. And they used to publish magazines, periodicals, literature, all about Krishnamurti, creating the atmosphere around the world to receive him as a world teacher. But it was all forced from outside. J. Krishnamurti has no realization, but he was intelligent enough to grasp slowly all the scriptures. But he was honest also. E.G. Krishnamurti is not even honest. Finally, when they thought that he is ready, they called a world conference in Holland, which used to be their great world centers. 6,000 leaders of Theosophical movement from all the countries gathered to receive J. Krishnamurti and declare that he is the world teacher. He came on the stage, and it is a very historical moment of honesty that he said, I am not a world teacher. It was a shock. To the whole Theosophical movement. It shattered the whole movement. But he has become completely accustomed about the whole great literature of mysticism. He dissolved the organization Star of the East, which was specially created for him. And he left the Theosophical Society. And he lived his whole life in a reaction. He was a giant intelligence. The reaction was against all those people who had forced him to do things which were not coming naturally to him. He was not allowed to be natural at all. He was not allowed to meet any girl. He was not allowed to mix with ordinary people. He was not allowed to enter into any ordinary school or college, private tutors, so that he can be proved to the world a superior being. As if he is coming directly as a Messiah from God. And obviously, if he was dishonest, he could have told to the world that I am a world teacher. He was ready for it. Intellectually, his memory was completely programmed. But because everything was imposed, it also created deep down in him a rebellion. He knows nothing what he is talking about. What he is writing, he knows nothing. One of the best books is At the Feet of the Master. That was published when he was almost 13 or 14 years old. Just to prove that even at the age of 14, he can produce such a great book. And it was not written by him. It was written by a man called Leadbeater. He was one of his tutors and very profound scholar about the Eastern religions. I have looked into all the theosophical literature of that time to find out the style, to whose style that book fits. Leadbeater has already written many books showing great intelligence and scholarship. The book that was published in J. Krishnamurti's name was written by him and perhaps polished by others. J. Krishnamurti does not even remember that when he has written that book, when he left the theosophical movement, he was asked, what about the book At the Feet of the Master, which has become a worldwide bestseller? It is a beautiful book. But he said, I don't know. I don't remember to have written it. He was honest. But because all these things were imposed on him, there was a constant reaction, rebellion, and he lived in that reaction his whole life. Theosophical movement destroyed the man. He may have become a Gautam Buddha. He has every possibility. But because of this reaction, he fought his whole life those dead tutors, those dead theosophical leaders, Annie Besant, Leadbeater, and others. He was fighting with those shadows his whole life against masters, against mystics, against scriptures. But it was not coming as a revelation. It was coming as a reaction. His whole life was wasted by the theosophical movement. If they have allowed him to grow naturally, there was possibility. The man had the potential of being a Gautam Buddha, but they destroyed him. And he could not get rid of those shadows. He lived in his early childhood, became so ingrained that he was fighting against them. He lived in a negativity, and one cannot live in a negativity and be nourished and blossom in a lotus flower.